Welcome back to the ICD1 series, and in this video we'll be talking about VLANs. So why do we need VLANs? So by default, all ports on a switch are part of the same broadcast domain. And this means that the larger our broadcast, the more devices that we have in our network, the larger our broadcast domain grows. And the problem with this is that if a broadcast domain grows too large, it can impact the performance of our network. So we know that, as an example, all ports on a switch are part of the same broadcast domain, and if we have an uplink to another switch, devices that connect to this switch are also part of the same broadcast domain as devices that connect to this switch. This means if we have a device over here and it sends a broadcast message, that broadcast will be sent at this port, and also this port, and this port. At the moment, this doesn't seem like it'll cause an issue. If our network's only 50 devices big or even 100 devices big, it really impact anything. This is known as a flat network because all devices in an enterprise network are part of the same VLAN, are part of the same network. Now the problem with this is that the larger our broadcast domain grows, the more broadcasts that will be sent on a network, and broadcasts are sent all the time. Every few minutes, a broadcast message will be sent. Now imagine if on a network we had 1,000 devices. That means that every 3-4 minutes, 1,000 broadcast messages will be sent, and every 3-4 minutes, a single device would have to process 999 broadcast packets. This causes a massive issue. Our devices would spend a lot of time processing the broadcast traffic, which would make them slow. The CPU would be being used up, and our links would become saturated with broadcast traffic because broadcast will be flown to every other switch in our network. The broadcast would not be limited. The broadcast scope is the size of the broadcast domain. So if we had 30 or 40 switches and all the devices were part of the same broadcast domain, our broadcast scope would be 30 or 40 switches big, which means that all of our devices would be affected by our broadcasts, by these broadcast packets. It also means that the failure domain is very large. Something faulty happens on the network. If this is a broadcast storm, every single device in our network would be affected, and our network would essentially be brought down. It also causes a security risk in that in a company there are different departments. So you'll have your sales department, your manufacturing department, your warehouse department, your IT department. By default, in a flat network like this, when we connect to the network, we're able to access any resource or any device within that network. That means that we can have people from the sales department accessing resources in the IT department. That could be mission critical servers with backup information or important files. That means that if we had some sort of scenario like this, where we had a wireless access point in our lobby or our reception for guests, so guests could connect wirelessly to our network when they visit our company, that means that guest, as soon as he connects to our network, he got access to every single device and every single resource on our network. He can access servers for the sales department. He can access servers in the IT department, servers in the warehouse department. He can access anything. This poses a risk. That means somebody that's walking past our building can access our network wirelessly, and then they can have access to all of our devices, all of our resources. These are two massive issues. We have a massive security risk, and we have a massive broadcast domain issue in which the broadcast domain grows too large. Now, what we could do, which is not done in the real world at all, is that we could physically separate, have separate devices for our departments, and those devices would be in different networks. In this case, we could have the sales department up here with devices, we could have warehousing down here, we could have IT down here. The problem with this is that we may only have 10, 20 or 30 people which connect for each department, and that means that we could, if we're being the most cost effective, we could satisfy the amount of devices we have by using 2 switches. But instead, we're having to use 3 or 4 switches in order to achieve this layer 2 separation and layer 2 security, and to limit the size of broadcast domains. This isn't a cost-effective solution to the problem, because even though now we have separation layer 2 and we have minimized the broadcast domain, we're having far too many devices, and this means that we're also limited physically. So that means that in case if this was the IT department, all all devices, or all hosts of the IT department would have to be located on this floor. If we had another building, that means that we would have to configure them with their resources, and so on and so forth. Because they would be in a different network than devices down here. This causes massive issues. But a main thing is that it's not a cost-effective solution to our problem. And so this is where VLANs come in. VLANs allow us to solve these issues by breaking up our switch into multiple broadcast domains. So physically, our devices connect to the same switch. Logically, they are connected to separate broadcast domains. So as an example, imagine this is our switch. We have we have 4 ports on our switch. If we were to separate our switch into 2 separate VLANs, it means that these 4 devices would be in different broadcast domains. What that means is that a broadcast message sent by this device will only be sent at this port. The switch will not bother sending the broadcast message at this port or this port, because those ports are separate VLANs. And so if we had a network with 1,000 devices, we could separate that network into 10 VLANs with 100 devices per VLAN, effectively limiting our broadcast domain to only a few switches or only a few devices. And this can save, this reduces the failure domain, this reduces the broadcast domain in our network, and this allows our network to run faster. It also allows us to have security at layer 2, because that means that a device can only access other resources in its VLAN, and if it has to access a device in another VLAN, then it would have to go through a router or some sort of layer 3 device. And normally, routers and layer 3 devices have much more security mechanisms than a layer 2 switch, so we can implement security, limiting what he can access. So imagine this is the sales department, this is the IT department, this is the switch, this is a server. By default, before, without VLANs, the user from the sales department would easily be able to access the server in the IT department because they're on the same switch. However, now, even though they're on the same switch but they're in different VLANs, the sales PC wouldn't be able to access the IT server without having to go through some sort of layer 3 device, and we can implement security mechanisms stopping that from happening. And with VLANs, we ignore physical boundaries. So that means that to be part of the same network and have access to the same resources, our devices don't have to be located in the same physical building. They could be located halfway across the world. As long as they're part of the same VLAN, they can have access to the same resources. So as an example, in the previous slide, I talked about how if we were to use separate physical infrastructure, it would cost too much money, and we're also physically limited. On where our departments can be. So all users part of the IT department would have to be on this floor, and if we run out of space, then we would have to find some way to connect them back to this floor so they can access all the resources that they need to have access to. Now we could connect people to the IT department on this floor, and they're still able to access the same resources as devices on this floor, as long as they're part of the same VLAN. So they don't have to be physically in the same location. We could have devices, IT hosts in a different town, in a different building, and they're still able to access the same resources as devices over here because they're part of the same VLAN. So let's look at some use cases for VLANs. Normally, each department would be in their own VLAN. This is done for security reasons. So we don't want to have hosts from the sales department being able to access resources in the IT department or vice versa. We want them to each be on the same little the separate network. So with VLANs, in this case, if I was going to draw a VLAN, we talked about before how devices that connect to the same switch are part of the same network. Well, with VLANs, that rule's thrown out the window. With VLANs, in this case, if these two devices were in one VLAN, the device were in another VLAN, they would have to connect to a different network, which would mean that like I said before, they're part of a different network. That's why they can access that's why they can access resources directly. They'd have to go through some sort of layer 2 device. But we could put each department into their own VLAN, and any resources that they need would also be part of that VLAN. So now they can access resources that only they need and communicate with devices that are in the same department, but then they wouldn't be able to access resources or mission critical servers in other departments without having to go through a layer 3 device first. We can also use a separate VLAN for managing traffic. So managing traffic, things like CDP, LTP traffic, we could even have like Wireshark captures, or we can have SNMP traffic. If that's mixed with regular traffic, that means that normal hosts would be receiving that traffic, and if they open up a wire capture or something like Wireshark, they would be able to see that traffic. By using a separate VLAN for managing traffic, we can keep our managing traffic and regular traffic separate, so that now they're not intertwined with each other, and only management devices will receive management traffic. Another use case of VLAN is to limit the size of broadcast domains. So imagine we have 1,000 users in our network, 1,000 devices. We can separate those into 10 different VLANs, meaning they're in 10 different broadcast domains, which means that each broadcast domain will be full of 100 devices instead of having one broadcast domain full of 1,000 devices. And we can limit the size of our failure domain. So imagine we had a sort of network like this. Okay, just as example. Okay, and let's say that just for the sake of this example, we have 10 devices which connect of each switch. If the devices were part of the same VLAN, that means that the failure domain now is for switches. If a broadcast storm happens, let's say this guy over here has some sort of issue and it starts sending loads and loads of broadcast messages, not only would devices on this switch be affected, devices on this switch and this switch and this switch would essentially bring down the network for these devices. If we put devices on this switch into, let's say, VLAN 10, devices in this switch to VLAN 20, VLAN 30, VLAN 40, that means that if this same device was to have some sort of issue with it and start sending broadcasts and go crazy by sending broadcasts, that means only this switch is going to be affected, only devices with this switch will be affected. So we have effectively limited the size of the failure domain from 4 switches down to 1. Devices from this switch and this switch and this switch will not be affected because they're in separate VLANs. And these switches wouldn't even receive traffic from this switch. The reason why is because they don't support VLAN 10. So because they don't support VLAN 10, there's no need for this switch over here to send any traffic to these switches over here, because no device on this switch exists in VLAN 10, which means there's no need to send VLAN 10 traffic to any of these switches. And so this is a visual diagram of what VLANs allow us to do. VLANs, so in this case we have a red VLAN and we have a green VLAN. Devices in the green VLAN can access each other, devices in the red VLAN can access each other, but devices in the green VLAN cannot access devices in the red VLAN, even though they connect to the same physical switch. They're logically separated and logically in different broadcast domains. And so this diagram is showing that in order to connect devices together that live on the same VLAN but on different switches, we would have to use a different connection to that VLAN. So in this case, in order for PC A1 and A2 to communicate with B1 and B2, A1 and A2 reside on switch A, B1 and B2 reside on switch B. We would have to have a link that runs from a port in VLAN in the green VLAN on switch A to a port that resides in the green VLAN on switch B. The same thing with the red VLAN. We would have to have a port or a cable running from a port in the red VLAN to port on the red VLAN on switch A to switch B. That isn't necessarily the case, because if you think about it, if we had, let's say on a switch we had 20 or 30 or 40 different VLANs, well that means that for each VLAN we would have to have a cable running from that VLAN to that same VLAN on a switch. So in this case, what I'm trying to say here is, imagine we had, let's say, VLAN 2, 3, 4 and 5. Well that means that we would have to have a cable running from VLAN 2 to VLAN 2 on switch A to switch B, VLAN 3 to VLAN 3, VLAN 4 to VLAN 4 and so on. So that means to allow inter-switch communication between devices in the same VLAN, would we have to have a link for each VLAN connecting the switches together? No, we wouldn't. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next slide. So 802.1 tagging. So 802.1q allows us to tell a neighboring switch to which VLAN the traffic belongs to. Essentially, If we go back to the previous slide, we can see that in order for devices in the green VLAN to communicate with devices in the green VLAN on switch A and switch B, we would have to have a cable connecting these devices together. So these two switches would have to be connected. But this diagram has shown that we would have to have a separate cable for each VLAN running between switch A and switch B, which means that if we had 10 VLANs on switch A, we would have to have 10 cables, each belonging to a separate VLAN, running between switch A and switch B. Instead of having that scenario, we can just have a single cable running, known as a trunk pool. You might remember that in earlier videos I kept saying that with switch-to-switch connections we always use a trunk pool, and the reason why is because a trunk link can carry traffic for multiple VLANs over a single connection, and the way it does that is by tagging. So with 802.1q, when the frame is sent out of a trunk link to another switch, it adds on a tag to that frame indicating to what VLAN that frame belongs to. That means that now in this case, if we have switch A and we have switch B, when switch B receives that frame, it can say, oh okay, this frame belongs to VLAN 10, and if this was a broadcast frame, then I'm only going to send this frame out ports in VLAN 10, or if this is a unicast frame, I'm going to look at my MAC address table and only look for entries for ports that live in VLAN 10. So with 802.1q, it defines a tagging mechanism that we can use so that when packets are sent over this trunk link, the receiving switch knows to what VLAN this frame belongs to. And let me make this clear. Tagging is only used when packets are sent over a trunk link. Switches do not understand VLANs. No, sorry, devices like PCs and laptops do not understand VLANs. So when they send traffic into the switch, it is untagged. The switch over here knows what VLAN that frame belongs to because it looks at what port it received the frame on, and looks at the VLAN that port is assigned to. Say it knows in the case that this port is in VLAN 10, so this frame is from a device in VLAN 10. So if this frame was going to another device on the same switch, no problem. But when this frame is going to a device that resides in VLAN 10 but on a different switch, switch A has to have some way of telling switch B that this frame is only destined for a device in VLAN 10, and it does this by adding on a tag. So 802.1q defines the frame format for packets that travel over a trunk link. Otherwise, we would need to have a connection for each VLAN. So if I go back to the previous slide, again, that means that a connection for each VLAN. That means that for switch A and switch B, we would have to have a cable running. We would have to have a connection in the green VLAN, and then connection in the red VLAN. If we had a let's say 20 different VLANs, that means between these switches, we would have to have 20 different connections, one for each VLAN, which would take up too much ports. Instead, what we can do instead is have a separate have a single connection which supports all VLANs. And so 802.1q tagging allows for complete layer segmentation across our networks. Other traffic would for different VLANs would leak between each other. So that means if there was no way of switch A telling switch B to what VLAN this frame belongs to, switch B would assume it's part of any VLAN, and we would have traffic leaking between VLANs, which essentially completely break the point of having a VLAN. Essentially, it would the whole point of using VLAN is for layer 2 segmentation. That would completely get rid of the point that, like, one trying to say traffic would leak between VLANs, which would cause a security issue. So just to make clear, tagging is only used when we have switch-to-switch connections, and by using a trunk, we're able to send traffic for multiple VLANs, for VLANs 10, 20, 30, and 40, over a single trunk link. And switch B will know to what frame that VLAN belongs to. Tag traffic isn't sent from a PC or laptop into the switch because these devices don't understand VLANs. And in this case, the switch will know to what VLAN this frame belongs to because it looks at the port it receives the frame on and the VLAN that port is assigned to. So let's go into a bit depth about 802.1q. 802.1q is an IEEE standard that defines how frames are tagged with VLAN information over a trunk link. So it describes the frame format of a frame over a trunk link and how we can communicate to the receiving switch to what VLAN this frame belongs to, so we can keep traffic separate between VLANs as they flow between switches. Because this is an IEEE standard, it means that it can be used with Cisco and non-Cisco gear, which means it can be used with different vendors. And with 802.1q, we can have up to 4,096 different VLANs on a single switch, which is a lot of VLANs. We would never ever need that much. And with the way 802.1q works is that a 4-byte tag is inserted between the source MAC address and the type lens field of the Ethernet frame. So as that frame is being sent over the trunk link, so I imagine this is our switch, 2 switches, then we have a trunk link. As that frame is being sent over the trunk link, a tag is inserted between these 2 fields in the Ethernet frame, which tells the receiver switch to what VLAN this frame belongs to. This introduces 32 bits overhead, so we have to add another 32 bits of data to the packet, which is just 4 bytes, which isn't a lot. And so this is what an 802.1q frame looks like. So as you can see, between the source MAC address and the type lens field, we insert this tag. This tag has a tag protocol identifier, a priority, an CFI field, and a VLAN ID field. The VLAN ID describes to the receiving switch to what VLAN this frame belongs to. So going into a bit more depth, the TP-ID field is used to identify to the receiving switch that this frame is an 802.1q tagged frame. The priority is used to prioritize traffic, which is used for quality of service. So with quality of service, we can give different kinds of traffic a different priority level, which means that more important traffic will be processed quicker than less important traffic. Again, we'll get into this. This is normally talked about in the voice track or in the CCNP series of how we can prioritize traffic, normally used for voice traffic and video traffic. The CFI field identifies whether the MAC address is in canonical or non-canonical format, and the VLAN ID field is probably the most important field in the 802.1q tag, as it identifies to what VLAN the frame belongs to. ISL tagging. So ISL is another trunk technology that we can use. So again, it's used to describe the frame format for traffic being sent over a trunk link. So in this case, 2 switches. As traffic being sent over the trunk link is used to describe the frame format of that frame, so that the receiving switch knows to what VLAN this frame belongs to. Now, ISL is a Cisco only protocol, which means that it's only designed to be used with Cisco switches. So we couldn't use the ISL protocol for tagging over a trunk if this was a Cisco and this was HP. Both devices are on neither end would have to be a trunk. Would have to be a Cisco device, and again it tells the receiving switch to which VLAN this frame belongs to. ISL only supports up to 1,000 VLANs, which is less than 802.1q. And with ISL, the original frame is encapsulated and additional header is added to the frame, which tells the receiving switch the VLAN this frame belongs to. Now the problem with ISL is because the Ethernet header is encapsulated within a complete new header, this adds a lot of overhead to the frame. In essence, add 30 bytes of overhead to the original Ethernet frame, with a 26-byte header and a 4-byte CRC field. And this CRC field, it calculates another FCS. So this means that if the data has an error in the original FCS field, the receiving switch will know about it until it's received the packet and spent time processing the packet and remove the ISL header. This is one of the reasons why ISL isn't used in today's networks, because it doesn't support what's called a native VLAN, which we'll talk about in the next video when we talk about how to configure VLANs on a switch, and it adds a lot of overhead to the original packet, which means that our network will run slower and data will be transferred slower as well. And this is the frame format of an ISL header. So as we can see, this is our Ethernet header, and instead of inserting a small tag, we're encapsulating an Ethernet frame inside another header with the ISL header and the ISL FCS. These are the fields in the ISL header. There are much more fields than there are in the 802.1q tag, which again, this is why ISL is not preferred over 802.1q. Like I said before, 802.1q. So the most important thing to realize about these two, about ISL and 802.1q, is that they allow devices in different switches, but that are part of the same VLAN. They allow them to communicate by using a single trunk link. Otherwise, what we'd have to do in this case, we would have to have a link in VLAN 33, a link in VLAN 30, a link in VLAN 31, running between the switches, which use up too much ports on our switch. So we've reached the end of this video, and just as a recap, we've looked at what VLANs do. They allow us to limit the scope of our broadcast domains. By assigning different VLANs, it means that we would have to use a different network for each VLAN. So that means if we had 100 VLANs, we would have to have 100 networks within a network within our company, or 100 different subnets. Trunk links allow us to carry traffic for multiple VLANs over a single connection, and the tagging we can use for the trunk links is either 802.1q or ISO. 802.1q is vendor neutral, can be used with any vendor. ISO is Cisco only. 802.1q has less overhead than ISO and accomplishes the same job, and also supports a native VLAN. So in the next video, we'll be looking at how to configure VLANs. I hope this has been informative for you, and I would like to thank you for viewing.